espresso.
There is still no giving them the money.
There is nothing. But
That's the thing that people.
yeah,
That's
worst thing
you can only do it for so long until you have no money. Hello there and welcome to the KAM Chat Live session. My name is Ndiro Ganga. I am a business journalist with Metropole TV. And this is a brilliant afternoon that we want to have a conversation with the leadership of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. And we want to put into context some issues regarding the manufacturing sector in the country. Now, we all understand that COVID-19 has caused great havoc world over. But before that, different sectors are doing well. For example, manufacturing is a very key sector. If you look at the global scene, it contributes about 16% of the GDP. And in Kenya, it contributes about 8.4% to the GDP. And if we remember, President Uhuru Kenyatta had his Big Four agenda some time back, and his goal was to ensure manufacturing contributes about 15% to the national GDP by 2022. Will that be possible? That's a wait and see. But right now, the world has a pressing issue, and that's coronavirus. How can businesses survive in this era, and what's the future of manufacturing? Joining me to have this conversation, as I'd mentioned earlier, are the leadership from KAM, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves. We'll start with you.
Hi, Ondiro. Thanks for being here with us as we engage with our stakeholders. So my name is Mushai Kunyiha. I'm the chairman of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers and also the CEO of Cooper K Brands Limited. It's a business that deals in agricultural inputs.
Great.
So glad to be here.
Thank you for making time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, dear.
Good afternoon to you.
My name is Rajan Shah. I'm the vice chair of Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and I also am the CEO of Capwell Industries. We are in the food and beverage and agro-processing space. Good to see you here.
Nice to have you here. Muchai, let me start with you. Manufacturing was one of the sectors that was handpicked by the president to be in the Big Four agenda. To mean it's a sector with so much potential. He wanted it to contribute 15% to the GDP by 2022. However, there's a virus that has caused havoc world over and has disrupted business. In the manufacturing scene in Kenya, what would you say is the impact of COVID-19?
Well, COVID was difficult, I think, for everyone. It wasn't just the manufacturing sector. And I think, like we know, it's been difficult for us personally, everybody, because we are all at risk. And then for different businesses. Obviously, some businesses have been hit much harder, like travel and so on. So in manufacturing, we have very many different sectors. So it's very wide. And different businesses have seen different things happening. And you know, it's now been almost 6 months since we started all these COVID issues breaking out in the country. So in some sectors, for instance, food has managed to continue supplying and essentials. And actually one of the good things, and at KAM we've been talking about Keep Kenya Moving. And we are very proud to say actually that our manufacturers, despite all those issues in supply chains, lockdowns and all those things, we were able to keep supplies going so that people didn't run out of food, we didn't run out of oil, we had all our basics that we needed. Now having said that, so those were able, we were able to supply that. In other areas where they are maybe reliant, say, on tourism, if you have food for the tourist sector, if you have stuff like in construction, where things are now starting to look like they will go down, demand overall has come down. If we take beverages, like the alcohol sector and beers and tobacco, they've all had challenges because of the lockdowns and so on. So it's been a mixed picture, but overall difficult for everyone.
And Muchai has done a good job in telling us the type of distraction that we've seen. However, for the person that's joining us and might not have a clear understanding, kindly paint a visual picture on the magnitude of this disruption that Muchai has just talked about.
So, Andrea, I think recently we jointly with KPMG did a survey, and out of the survey we found that about 42% of the manufacturers had actually reduced their capacity significantly by more than 50%. And this was a survey which was done in May. So the impact initially was high. As what Muchai said, I think some sectors there was undue demand when there was a panic buying. So the food sector, partly the personal hygiene sector, they all kind of benefited out of that. And then of course we saw the dip. Subsequently, as time flows by, we are beginning to see the demand to pick up as things are normalizing, and as also buying patterns are also normalizing. So as I would say, yes, the impacts has been major, and some sectors, as we say, are still probably grappling from the outcomes of what COVID is going to have. But in manufacturing, I can say there has been a level of resilience, and we hope that resilience is what's going to take us through this once we are out of COVID.
Great.
It's worth adding, actually, and it's interesting how we stop different things, but they have effect downstream. So one that had not actually come to my mind, I was talking to one of our manufacturers, is people like uniform makers, people who make school uniforms. Schools are closed.
Yes.
So there is no school uniform being made. There are people who print exercise books or make pencils and pens. Business has slumped significantly because schools are not really operating.
Great.
So again, it just goes through that there has been some big impact on certain sectors. Other sectors less so.
Great. And before we continue with the conversation, we just do not want this to be a conversation among three people. That's why we call it a chat session. So you can join in on the conversation on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, and even LinkedIn using the official Kenya Association of Manufacturers handles. The hashtag to use is KAM Leadership. Muchai, you mentioned a very pertinent point before I jumped in, and you said there are sectors where the disruption, the end is not foreseeable anytime soon because we do not know when the virus would end. Then what does this mean for these people in terms of redefining and rethinking their business strategies?
Yeah, I think And like we said earlier, this is a global problem. So it's not restricted to just Kenyans. So everybody around the world is looking at these situations and starting to think, how are we going to get through these things? But one of the lines we've been using is a VUCA environment, you know. That's what you'll hear a lot of people talk about. It's very volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. So people have to deal with this, and businesses have to start rethinking, not just in manufacturing, all other businesses. I think earlier we were talking about even hotels and tourism. How are you going to rethink your business in the new circumstances? So one of the things that you have to be when you're thinking resilience is you've got to think about survival mode, because this is now survival time. We've got a couple of months, we don't know how long. Again, and even the businesses that look like they were doing well, like Rajan said, food looked like it was doing great at the beginning, and then it's kind of tapered off a little bit. So you really have to think deeply, especially now, how do you deal with uncertainty? How do you deal with the uncertainty is being able to be, what do you call it? You can move easily. I'm losing my word there. But you've got to be, you can adjust quickly to the circumstances. You've got to be very careful. One of the key things, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it, is cash flow, for instance, and liquidity. Because you now have to really conserve your cash. If you don't have cash, you're going to die. It's not about profitability. It's about cash to keep your business going. So it is challenging times. But I think the thing I see it through it as well is that people will survive. Because the guys who think about this and plan and take the right measures, they will survive. So it's not the end of the world. We can get through this situation.
He's very optimistic, and I want to come to you. There is always opportunities in every crisis. What are some of the opportunities for the manufacturing sector in this crisis?
Yes, I fully agree that a lot of opportunities have been created. And I think this is where, as what Muchai said, we have to keep a very open mind. To give an example, in Kenya, right now, when this COVID came, we had a need for personal protective equipment, clothing, masks, gowns, all sorts of different things. A lot of what we were importing before. We found our manufacturers here retooling their factories to be able to start manufacturing here. So that's an opportunity they saw. In addition to that, COVID is also going to bring new norms, new normals of how we are going to reach, our products are going to reach to our consumers. I just recently, if I give an example of the breweries, I just saw an advert how they want to now bring cans of beer to your home. So that's a more of how do you get your product to the new innovative ways through e-commerce to get your product to the consumer. So this is what we are saying, that manufacturers will have to innovate, their product, their packaging, their offering, their value proposition to their consumers. If the wallet is going to be smaller, we'll have to give a different value proposition. But the fact is that I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. There's always a silver lining. And this is what we are encouraging all our manufacturers not to lose hope and see through the cloud, and there is always going to be
You seem to be agreeing with him.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it's easy for everyone to see the dark side of all the challenges because they're there and it's in the news feed, it's all over how things are difficult. And some of it is real and it's accurate. You know, there are troubled times ahead. So it's not saying that it's going to be easy and we're going to sail through this. We're going to need to work very hard. But there are ways out. I think that is the message we're saying. There are ways out. You just have to be able to accept the situation you're in and see that it is very difficult. Because sometimes the problem we have is we are kind of dreaming of where we were. And we want that to be there. We want to go back there. And I don't think we're going back. So, you know, whatever happened pre-COVID, like, you know, pre-COVID, even in history, we'll be telling our grandchildren, before COVID, life was like this.
Yes.
After COVID, this is what we started doing.
Yeah.
So we're not going back.
Yeah.
So we just need to rethink the ways we're going to do things and what the opportunities are that are there. And even as we go through these clouds, like you said, and these rough bumps, and there will be rough, so you still have to think about how am I going to survive through these rough bumps. We know that at the end of the rough bumps there's a runway, and we'll be able to move on from there.
And just to add to that, I mean, what Muchai is saying, you know, in this digital revolution, maybe what we are seeing now or are going to expect might have happened 10 years down the line.
Okay.
But what COVID has done is that's actually fast forwarded that.
Yeah.
So it's probably a way of saying that let's prepare ourselves now, which we anyway had to prepare ourselves for.
Yeah.
Right?
And what do you
It's easy.
say? It's the pandemic has also been an eye-opener, because if you look at probably the pharmaceutical sector, where we are seeing a lot of opportunity, we were importing most of the goods from that sector. Now it's up to us to start making them, because Germany, the biggest producer of ventilators, said we are not selling for the rest of the year because we
Yes.
might need them.
Yeah. Yep. And that's, in fact, at KAM we had a team with, led by the automotive sector that came up with one of the locally made ventilators, which was available. At one level, you know, that was great that we could be able to innovate. And in fact, the key lesson I got from that is that people who would never have talked to each other, you know, as we were talking to them in the room, they're like, we didn't know that there's this computer programmer in Kenya, and there's this machine tool guy who's here, and we could get together and create something new. So thankfully, and that's good, it may be bad for that business, but thankfully we haven't had to use those ventilators because our caseload has been low. So that's a good thing. It's not like we needed to use more of those ventilators. But the lesson there is, what else can we make?
Yeah.
Okay, because we could make, and I was telling them, yeah, I mean, what are the other things that we assume that we're going to have to go and buy somewhere, but we could make them. So it kind of opens our minds to, if we put these people together, what else could we make?
Yeah. So we have the brains and the skills.
Yes.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And this is what is coming out into the open, that we have these brains, we have these skills, they just need an avenue through which they can actually showcase them, this talent.
This talent,
Right.
yeah.
Great. Now, we've spoken about some of the opportunities and what those in the manufacturing sector can do in the next 2 years or in the wake of the pandemic to sustain themselves. However, we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta just recently release an economic stimulus package, and the jury is out and decided whether the package did good to the sector or not. I want to find out from you, from some of the incentives that he put out there, from ensuring that those who are under 24,000 do not pay taxes, to reducing VAT from 16 to 14%, has it had an impact in the sector?
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that we will find out over time the whole picture of what those things did. But the ones that did have immediate impact, and there are some of those measures that had immediate impact, was like the repayment of VAT refunds. These were long overdue refunds, and what they did for a lot of businesses is just give them cash. Because like we said earlier, cash flow is the key thing during any crisis. So that release of cash into the market, it was about 10 billion or so, I think 10 or 14 billion, that was paid as VAT refunds,
14 billion.
which we were owed. So that was good. And there's still more to be paid. We actually have other withholding VAT refunds, which we are discussing with government about how do we bring those out as well. They did help with businesses to meet their, just their cash flows, etc. The tax also, the income tax reduction, especially for those below 24,000, I think that was very useful also in creating demand at the lower end, because it gives people a little bit more cash and they can spend that money on food and that kind of thing, because it gives them something to to enjoy and work around. Yeah. But maybe we'll talk about later on also about what then happened with the tax amendments bill. Some of the other tax changes we think are not going to be as useful. Yeah, but those ones at least were very useful at that particular time. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add again, I mean, Uchai, that yes, we as manufacturers, we are appreciative of the 14 billion.
Yeah.
But I think what we would like to see, this is just like in many other countries, this is cash flow which is due to manufacturers on a timely basis. This should be the norm going forward. Whether this before COVID or after COVID, this is the way we should expect, and this is what is going to enable businesses to have the firepower to continue growing. So I think we would like to encourage government to, of course we are nowhere near what the refunds are to be paid, but this was at least the starting point. But we need to normalize the whole refund cycle so that actually, technically speaking, no one should be owed anything beyond 1 month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, 30 days, and
30
I
days,
have my
yes,
money.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Great. We shall be crossing over to some of the feedback that you've been sending us very shortly. Remember, the hashtag to use is KAM Leadership on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, or through the Kenya Association of Manufacturers official handles. That's KAM on Twitter, or you can tweet me directly at Ondioro Oganga. Before we cross over, it wouldn't be a chat session if we don't get to the murky waters just a little bit, because I'm just preparing you for online. The tackles there are a little bit tough. And the pandemic has posed challenges and also opportunities, and we've discussed them. However, there are businesses that have sort of crossed the line. For example, we said pharmaceuticals were one of the biggest beneficiaries of this pandemic because they fit right in with the services that they provide and the goods. However, in recent exposés, we've seen that some private sector companies have done fraudulent businesses and looted public resources, allegedly. I want to find out from you, where do you stand and your thoughts on the efficacies of doing business amid a pandemic?
Yeah, I think those are very sad and disconcerting stories around the corruption that we have. But I look at it, we can zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
One of the things people talk about COVID, that what you don't want to have is pre-existing conditions. So, and I think that applies to governments, to states, and to people as well. So one of our challenges is our pre-existing condition, which we all know is the nature of our environment and corruption, and all those other vices. And sometimes I think we throw stones a lot at government around corruption and ethics and so on. But actually it's a culture-wide issue around our ethics and so on. Because if you look at the people who are undertaking all those schemes and measures, they are all Kenyans. We replace them and the same thing happens again. So there's something in our culture that we need to address, and I think it's spiritual, it's educational, it's cultural, and how we deal with things. So, like we're talking, even in our businesses, we have such a high cost of compliance because you can't leave stocks without counting them every month because somebody will have taken something. We end up firing salespeople because they took stocks, they said they sold them, but they kept the money. So it's a real cultural issue which we need to address. Of course, it's good that even government at that stage, we still need to take the criminal action and that kind of thing. But we need to think about what's our approach to this. This morning I was reading also an article and people are saying, we also know people who've participated or at least are suspected of participating in corruption, but we applaud them. We take their money. When they buy us drinks, we drink them. We call them for harambes because we know they're going to give us more money.
Yeah.
Our relationship with that corruption is not as good. And we need to think about it in terms of what COVID has revealed, just as we were talking about COVID revealing our skills and our ability. COVID again should reveal to us, this is our society. Do we like this? And what can we do around it that is broader based? Not just for what government can do, but what each of us can do in that participation.
Sha, yeah. What are the economic implications of doing business in a low trust economy?
Very high. And of course, the big elephant in the room here that we're obviously talking about is corruption. In any society, corruption, and this is why I like that this will be taken as a very holistic kind of, I think this is a national conversation we are having, that it's endemic in our society. It starts from the moment that a child is young and they're actually seeing it and it's visible. So this is a conversation which we need to have. We need to teach our children from the time they are in kindergarten, so that we try and build in the right ethos, the right ethics of doing things. It's not only just business, it's in every walk of life that we go through. And that kind of means that the cost, sometimes it's very difficult to quantify, but we know that the impact it has on economic development in terms of economic growth and poverty for that matter, right? How it's impacting poverty. So I think we have to face it. Just like how the pandemic came and we are facing it. This is really a question that we all have to, it's not about just manufacturers. For every taker, there is a giver, as they say, right? So yes, everyone is guilty as charged, but as what Mushai has put, the conditions that sometimes we are put in to be almost forced to give are those conditions that we should remove.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it should be punitive enough for the taker. And most important, we should all have a conscience that this is not the right thing to do.
It doesn't, and the cost. I think, just adding on that, I think there was a nice clip, and maybe the media team sometime will put it on, that compared, there's a speaker from India, and he was comparing a milk transaction in Holland and what you could see in India. And in Holland, you go to the farmer's door, the milk is there, you just pick and you leave the money. The farmer is not there, there is nobody there, you do it, it's an honesty thing, you just do it. But when you go to India, that was the story he was giving, he says the milk, there has to be a milk inspector to be sure that the milk doesn't have water. Okay, there has to be a cashier to receive that money. That cashier needs a manager to make sure he banks that money, and then there will be an auditor to make sure. So a transaction that happened with very little cost ends up being very expensive. So what has also happened in Kenya, everything we do is so much more expensive. And later we'll be talking about our competitiveness and our productivity. Everything is so much more expensive because we have a low trust economy. If you go to, I've seen in the US, like a Starbucks does not have a cashier, or the waiters are the cashiers. The guys who are serving, it's two people, they'll serve, collect the money, everything. Here you have a cashier, a supervisor, and then somebody else collect the cash, because we have a low trust economy. So we really need to raise that trust, because it becomes a cost to business and makes everything more expensive, makes us all less productive. So actually we see the cost of corruption as just that money that was stolen. But the overall cost on everything, even now what we have to do for PPOA, for tenders and all this, there's this whole system trying to deal with this corruption, but generally doesn't do it until we sort our systemic issues. Yeah.
One other tackle, and then we become peaceful.
Yes.
There have been stories surrounding industrial area, and we do not want to go into the details because it's still out there, it will be decided. But I want to know your thoughts with regards to labor rights in the manufacturing sector.
Okay. Well, for KAM, we have our, what do you call it, like our charter, and what we are always pushing is good practice. We also house the Global Compact, which is an association of companies under the UN, and we are pushing the Sustainable Development Goals, some of which include meaningful work and labor relations and so on. So as an association, our push is always like we should have good labor relations in business. And it's important for businesses to have good labor relations, because we also understand that even the companies and the economies that have been doing well is those where you engage everybody in the labor force. In KAM, we also push, and we've been training on Kaizen. Kaizen is a Japanese system that has gotten them where they are in terms of production. And there is no Kaizen if you don't engage everybody. From the shop floor, you have to have that mindset that the guys on the shop floor, they actually know more about production than the people in the boardroom. So engaging your workers and treating them properly so that they are part of your growth is absolutely critical. So I think it is sad when we see people mistreating their staff and so on, because it will also be sad for their business, because their business, they might get short-term gain, but in the long term, they are not going to go anywhere.
As KAM, I'd like to hear you probably take command of this situation and probably say, what are some of the things in terms of infringement of labor rights that KAM will not condone in its membership or in its association?
Right, so I think we live in a society where we are bound by legislation. We have laws, and those laws is what guides us as to how we should behave as a society. And similarly, we have reasonably strong labor laws in place. Yes, and as KAM, we are all constantly having engagements with our members to guide them what these laws are, make them aware of them, and what the best practices are. We also give training to members on how they should kind of enhance the labor engagements, how they should actually skill them up. So all these are things as an association, we are proactive with our members to ensure that our members do not fall behind or are kind of violating any laws. But of course, there will always be a bad apple in any basket. And yes, we will have some people who are non-compliant, but we have to see this as a very dynamic process. We are a society which is progressing, and as we progress and as we step up the income ladder, there will be more awareness, and actually there will be also more demand from society for how we should all behave.
What won't you condone from your membership?
We shall not condone violating any law. Any labor laws we would not condone.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm also looking at it from a business perspective for the business people is that, and we know today it's social media, everything, the news is out there, and I think it's great as well because it starts to reveal some of the malpractice that may not, because we can all come here to the boardroom and look very nice and say we follow things, but the reality will come out. That's a thing now. And today, the cost of that coming out for you will spend weeks and months trying to repair your brand name, which you didn't have to do. If you are treating your people right from the beginning, it's a huge risk for business today. So it's something that you really need to do. Not just because it's right, because that's the first thing, you do it because it's right, but also you do it because it's going to cost you if you don't do it. And what we do represent, like Rajan said, we will be training you and so on, but if we are caught in those things, we are not going to be representing anybody in criminal court or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's now cross over to Twitter and sample some of the views that you've shared, because this is your conversation. At Courage Jethro on Twitter says, I am in the agriculture sector, and so far things are not good. The global market is not adapting, at least not as fast as it should. You want to take that one?
Yeah. I suppose, yes, the global markets will take some time to adjust. Everybody is going to be adjusting as we are going through this change. And, agriculture is also where my primary business is in. But I think we've also seen some of the export agriculture has picked up again, like floriculture, although at the beginning of the pandemic it had really slumped almost to zero. At the moment, freight has been one of the big issues. But in Kenya, one of the things we are also, in our term with Rajan, one of the things we want to work on is the linkages between agriculture and industry. Because probably that's one of our big strengths that we could use if we are trying to get manufacturing to 15%, is, you look at what we have. So we produce a lot of goods, but how can we, or rather we produce a lot of agricultural produce, what can we do with that on an industrial space? How can we connect the two so that we are value adding to whatever we are producing agriculturally? Already we have some people say canning fruit or vegetables for export and so on. That's a little bit of value addition. But the other things we could grow that become other products. And I think there's a huge opportunity for Kenya, just taking what we have and adding value to it so that we can grow it. It's even things like storage. So we know things like potatoes. We lose a lot of potatoes because we don't actually have storage systems. And we can store and process them a little bit further, which gives them a little bit more life. So there are a lot of opportunities if we look at industry and agriculture being tied together.
More like there's a broken chain between when the goods are harvested to the time they reach the market.
Yes. And not even that, it's a continuous supply chain. You have to look at it as a full supply chain. Because a lot of the time you find the farmer does not want to grow something because he doesn't know who he's going to sell it to.
Yeah.
And the person who needs to build a factory to process something, he can't build a factory if he doesn't know where it's coming from. Luckily, in Kenya we have success stories like that's closer to my industry, is like dairy. The dairy sector has been pretty successful if you look at it long term, because we have milk producers and there's a nice chain that takes them to a milk factory, and then it's processed and sold out. So those are the kind of things. And I'm not saying it doesn't have problems. It has some challenges, and it can continue being improved. We have the same somewhat for tea. But again, the problem with tea is that we sell most of our tea without value adding it. So there's an opportunity there again. But there is, at least people know that if I grow tea, this is where I take it, this is how it goes, and so on. So those are the kind of things we need to think about other products.
So just to add again to what Misha has said, if you look at exports, because I couldn't quite grapple from the question whether the challenge was exports or it's actually local, but I'll just really share. On exports, I think this is where innovation came. We are one of the major horticulture and floriculture exporter in the world. When pandemic came and all these flights shut down, we re-engineered ourselves, and very soon we converted some of our passenger flights into cargo flights with KQ. And frankly speaking, in a very short period of time, we started actually seeing both our flowers and horticulture going back to the export markets. So I think we kind of very quickly kind of there was a fair bit of resilience in that. Talking about the local agricultural sector, I would say we had preconditions as well before COVID. I think this whole space about, and this is part of the Big Four agenda, food security, and then of course the linkage through agro-processing into manufacturing. How can we be self-sufficient in our food? Whether it's maize, whether it's wheat, rice, the major staples, and other products like what he said, potatoes. And this is where I think we need to have, again, a very sound agricultural policies, and then the market linkages, and then further kind of see how those produce can be supported through agro-processors, so that there is a whole chain through which that there is an uptake of those products, and more importantly is how can we competitively grow. Because we all the time talk about food prices. Why our food price is high? It's because we are not probably competitively growing. If we can grow competitively, we will also ensure that our 50 million consumers also get prices of food at which is what is affordable.
Great. Let's take a look at another tweet by Lucy Shege. She says, SMEs are currently facing more challenges in access to finance, greater cash flow constraints, and a bigger drop in demand and turnover. Finance and cash flow, particularly you mentioned if you don't have cash flow, you're done. But also accessing of loans for SMEs pre-COVID was very difficult because they do not have collateral or enough collateral according to banks. Now here comes a pandemic that disrupts the little cash flow that they had. What is the survival plan for these SMEs with regards to access to finance?
Yes, a very, very relevant, very pertinent question, and this was a question, as you said, it goes even before COVID. I think we are as KAM, we are very cognizant of the fact that we have to support SMEs. And SME is actually, now we have very specifically got what's called an SME hub, which is actually housed within KAM, specifically to look at issues relating to SMEs. Just to touch, I mean, mainly on your finance, which is your question. I mean, we are encouraging and seeing how we can actually remove the friction in the flow of finance through the SME sector, because at the end of the day, every member who was here, even the large companies, were at one time an SME. So we all start from that. That was our base from where we started, and we need to make sure that we support these SMEs. During the COVID time, we need to, just like other parts of the world where there are some funds which have been created for small businesses to access those funds, is something that we need to make sure that it actually hastens, both from the private sector and from the government point of view.
Moshe, the government gave 3 billion SME credit guarantee schemes. How far will this go?
Well, it will go as far as 3 billion. But the thing is,
wow, that means 3 billion cannot go very far.
It will go. I think it was going to go further because the idea was to create a guarantee scheme, and I think that is still in the works, and to risk share. So if I'm not wrong, I think they were talking about a 20% risk share. So that would have meant the 3 billion would have gone, 5 times that to 15 billion lending out to the SMEs. The challenge with SMEs, and it's not a Kenyan problem, it's a global problem, is partly the risk around lending to SMEs, and also now the capacity within the SMEs. So one of the things we're doing within the SME hub is trying to provide training for SMEs, because also when you go to the bank and you want some funding, you don't just say, I'm an SME, I need a bit of money, please give it to me. There's a whole business language that we all needed to learn and you need to grow in. So it's, what is your cash flow? What's your plan? Who are you selling to? So we're trying to train SMEs as well, so that you need some of those skills and capabilities to be able to access that finance. The ability to sell the story and tell the story and put it together is very important. If you see, for instance, and I think it has been a raging debate recently about technology and the technology companies that are here and how they are funded and who owns them and so on. But if you see, the real issue around that is who can sell their story. Who can put together their story, identify their customers, clearly show a line between their whatever they are making and their cash flows and so on, and then be able to sell that story. So it's that skill, and I think maybe we need to grow further in that skill. That's the skill we need to grow in and learn, so that we can also keep the lenders comfortable, because lenders are happy to lend, but their question is always like, how will I get this back?
And when will I get it back? And that story is not unique for any business, whether it's a small business, medium, or a large business.
Yes, you have to.
It's the same. The lender probably would see it the same way. That are you able to kind of convince them that you have a business model which is going to take you through to be able to repay your loan.
Okay. We have a comment here that says manufacturers must understand which parts of their social, business and political environment will change in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic and invest accordingly to prepare for the new normal.
Yeah, it's a good comment. I think I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with it. But I think we have to look at it from both sides. There's many things, and Rajan mentioned them, that are going to change and have changed dramatically.
Okay.
Our ability to travel, our, where you can source materials, even just Zoom meetings and what we're able to do with digital and technology. We're talking about sales online. But on the other hand, there's a lot that is going to stay the same.
Like what?
Even after that, we still eat food.
Oh.
We still drink water. Okay? Our children need to go to school. So there are some things, sometimes we can get carried away with how many things are going to change, but we need to understand a lot of things will stay the same, and we can still continue with those. But just remember that the things that change will change pretty significantly. In fact, there was a quote I tweeted once, we were saying that we overestimate how many things will change, but we underestimate how much the things that change will change.
Oh.
Okay, because the things that change, they change pretty radically. So we have to keep watching for those. And like we said, it's a VUCA world, so that the things that are changing faster. And what COVID kind of reveals as well, it's not just the COVID-related things. There are other things already changing. Maybe now they are brighter, and you always need, as any good business person, to know what's changing in your industry and what is going to stay the same.
Okay.
But just if I may, add a little bit to that. I mean, and this is some interesting story about work from home. We hear a lot about that.
Yeah.
And we think that this might be the new norm and the new permanent thing. Yeah. Interestingly, I was talking to a CEO of a technology company in the US. And this is a technology company, and you would expect that this is what they would embrace. Interestingly, they say that, as much as, yes, we'll have more efficiencies, the social interaction between people brings creativity. So there is also a negative side to this, that we hope that after COVID, we should be able to have that creativity can thrive. And the creativity only thrives when human beings interact on a face-to-face basis.
We are going to remain human.
Yes, we have to remain human.
We're going to remain human, which reminds me of a funny anecdote I had from Sweden.
Yeah.
The joke they were giving in Sweden was that the social distancing rules are over now for the 1.8 meters. Now we can go back to our normal 5 meters. Because in Sweden they don't interact as much.
They don't interact.
Yeah.
But for us, in our societies,
Yes.
we need to interact.
Yes.
That's the way we live, yeah.
Great. Speaking of beyond the pandemic, someone says there is need to attract more investors inboard to make the sector as lucrative as possible. Question is, which investors are we attracting? Foreign investors, or do we need to start thinking of harnessing the power of local investment?
I think it's absolutely right. We have both investors, and we like to emphasize this to government whenever we meet with them, that they are local investors, like a lot of our members. If we take our members today, many of whom are local investors, they are already invested. So it's not people who you are trying to call to come and invest. They have already invested. They've already shown their signs. But obviously and I don't understand the economics fully, but definitely our capital stock is not big enough. We still need to invest more capital and bring more in. And you only get it from two places. Either you're creating more profit so that you can reinvest it, or you get other people to invest in your country. So we need both. And we're having challenges there. And I think one of the ones we've been pushing with government is consistent policy. Because what we found in government is that policies change regularly, or rather, let's say too often, and so it isn't clear what the runway is going to be. In the recent, we talked about it earlier, the tax amendment bill, for instance, they've changed our investment deductions. We are now charging VAT on machinery that you import for manufacturing, which is, it's at 14% is a huge amount. And those are things in most countries that are looking at attracting investment. You don't need to, because you're charging the investment. And if you're trying to bring in investment, what you want to do is open the door so that the investment comes in. What you want to charge is the productivity. Whatever is produced, tax that, but don't make it expensive to bring in the investment into the marketplace. So for instance, we had investment deduction of 150% if you invested outside the big metropolitan areas, Nairobi, so it was Nairobi, Kisumu and Mombasa, I think. If you went out to the counties, we want the counties to develop, but now we've removed that incentive. So there is no longer any incentive to say go a little bit further out.
What's the logic behind removing that incentive?
I think there was some argument about what the tax expenditure is, how much the government was looking at spending, because they on one perspective, the government can look at that and say, we are spending money to incentivize other people. But from our perspective as investors, we would be looking at it and say, if you go look around Kenya, it's not like we are over-invested. Okay? Sometimes people argue, like in real estate, people have overbuilt, there's too much real estate. But in industry, in manufacturing, we are not arguing about overcapacity anywhere. So you can't say that people were overutilizing this facility. In fact, I'm not sure what the numbers are, how much had been used of this facility. So there's still opportunity there, and we actually need the investment. We're saying we need to grow to the 15%, and that is going to come when people invest in new factories and so on. So I think we had not even spent enough of it, and we needed more. And then secondly is to look at, although you get the investment deduction, government collects taxes in many other ways. They pay as you earn. That's the first one. Because people build a factory, they have employees, they already on a monthly basis, they're going to be churning out some taxes. There'll be VAT. Whatever they produce will be coming to the market, there'll be some VAT coming into the market. And then hopefully there'll also be some corporate tax. Because eventually, although you have an investment deduction for the beginning, you will start paying corporate tax in the future. So it's the government investing, and they need to see that instead of tax expenditure, is it tax investment? Because I'm investing in something that is going to produce in the future. Even most investors, when you start a factory, you don't expect it to produce money the first day.
Yes.
You're like, I'll first pay back, and then I'll start getting money from it.
And not to mention the multiplier effect of the development which goes around that.
Yes.
So, and this was the whole motivation behind actually motivating companies to go beyond just the traditional Nairobi, Mombasa and Kisumu. So, but just again to add on to investments, I mean, and what Mushai said, I mean, yes, there's a need for both local investment and foreign investment. And maybe I can just give my, experience. even in this COVID times, we don't stop thinking about investment. Pandemic has a finite time. We're going to be through this. We have to continue. We have to continue growing. So the story doesn't stop. Investments will have to continue, and we will have to continue kind of thinking about them. Maybe we will delay in, doing those investments, but eventually they will all come through.
Okay. Mushai, it seems like somebody was listening to you when you said we have local investors. So Daniel Mathia is asking, what are the notable startups in the manufacturing sector in Kenya?
Notable startups? It's Capwell. It's a notable startup. They've been here for many years. You know, we've got a lot of our big companies. I mean, we even forget things like EABL, KBL. It started in 1925 or the 20s, somewhere there. But they're all, you know, like Rajan says, all the big companies you see here today that are locally owned, they all started as, they were startups, and they've done a lot. So we have companies doing steel, we have companies doing oil. There are very many, any of the big companies you look at, they are startups. I think one of the challenges we have, and it's a recent thing maybe in the West, and it's in the technology space, which is not the same in the manufacturing space. Manufacturing businesses grow over time. They don't grow like Airbnb, because you can start it, people can hook up, and suddenly you're a big global brand. Manufacturing takes time. So you grow, you invest in your capacity, you invest in your systems, your ability to produce, and your supply chains, you're developing your supply chains and your distribution. So they take time. So one of the challenges we have is that if you're looking for quick, easy money, you know, maybe manufacturing is not your
not the place to be.
It's a long journey that takes years and years of hard work, but it's very rewarding, because once you're up there and you've built it and you've got it, then you know it will start riding itself.
Yes.
Shah, he mentioned you as a successful startup.
Thank you.
Is it rewarding?
Oh, it is, and you know, reward comes in not just the bottom line. Reward comes in the passion to see that you're actually creating employment. You're creating, actually, you're building homes, right, of people through employment, and the follow-on effect of that is what you actually try to see. But just, I mean, Muchai, just adding to what you've said, startups. I mean, during this pandemic time, we have had the highest number of memberships, new memberships. Some are actually new startups which have come up during the pandemic time. So there are startups coming up right now, but even beyond the manufacturing, just to give you as a name, I mean, Twiga Foods, you must have heard of Twiga Foods,
yes.
a reasonably new startup. It's a technology play, it's a logistics play, it's a success story which has just, we have seen in the last year and a half or so. So there are so many success stories out there.
Okay.
Yes.
I want us to touch on some of the restrictions that have been put in place with regards to COVID. I'm seeing several tweets here. Coach Jethro says, before COVID-19, our nation's manufacturing industry was working towards 24-hour economy. This has been affected by the curfew. How will we go back to striving this great initiative? And then there was another. Marvin Wordsmith says, what does KAM think of the government's measures on COVID-19, i.e. curfews and closing of bars? We can take the questions differently. Let's start with you, Shah.
Okay, so on the 24-hour economy, yes, of course, the decision by government to impose a curfew was completely health related, and rightly so, we had to contain it, and we hope that we are going to soon see the flattening of the curve. As soon as the curve flattens, there's nothing stopping us to recoil back to our 24-hour economy.
But will the curve flatten when the economy is back at 0, or we can try flatten the curve when the economy is at 5?
Yes, so this is where the question comes. How resilient are we going to be? And this is the hope that we have, that we flatten the curve. The sooner we flatten the curve, the less the casualties will be, right? And that's the desire. And so basically the fact still remains that whichever way, we have to flatten it. So if we all play our role as the citizens of this country and ensure that we do not get ourselves infected, the curve will flatten. And once the curve flattens, we get back into the economy. So it's like a chicken and egg situation. But I feel that we are, as a country, resilient to recoil back into our 24-hour economy.
Moshai, closing of bars?
Closing of bars. I think there's let's go back to the, we'll come to that, but I'm saying that we need to look at the whole public health side as well, because this is a public health issue. That's what COVID started out as. And I was talking to a public health expert who was just telling me the problem with public health, if you succeed, nobody sees it. And nobody claps for you, okay? So let's look at other countries. You say South Africa, and you look at India, or say the US and Brazil even. If you look at what devastation has been caused by COVID, you know, I mean, it's huge, yeah? So to a certain extent, we've had deaths, we've had infections, yes, and that is sad. But we've actually not done badly in, you know, keeping this thing
Under
down.
control.
And of course, it's one of those things that success is not, in a sense, rewarded. So I think it's a good thing. So we also need to see that we have done good and we've done well. Of course, the Ministry of Health will tell us, and I think they were saying, was it today or yesterday, it's not over. Okay, it's still continuing, but we have done well. So yes, there's a balance between that economic cost, what's the economic cost, and what is the health cost, which is very difficult. Any person you ask, there are probably 40 million views or 50 million views in Kenya about what that balance should be. But it's a balance that needs to be struck. And so the bars, I think they did, and we need to see when will we be able to reopen the bars, and then go back again, like we were talking about the corruption. What is our responsibility? Because if we go there, are we going to keep, I think the worry again from the Ministry of Health, are we going to keep the social distancing? Are we going to create little pockets of infection that multiplies this? How disciplined are we going to be around those things? So it kind of comes back to us to demonstrate or to do the right thing so that we are able to go back to some of those things.
Okay, another tweet here by Dean Milkiar says, also the fierce and spoken Cold War at the EAC between Kenya and Tanzania. Any prospects of resolution, creating serious trade barriers since Kenya imports a lot of goods from Tanzania? Sure?
Yeah. Right, yes.
Yeah.
This is the East African community and how we are going to ensure that, again, we have frictionless trade amongst our partner states. I think we have come a long way. But of course, we are also aware that there are a lot of frictions, a lot of trade barriers that exist. And we have to try and slowly resolve them. And I think positively, if we look at it, and this is a bit of a give and take, we have to do as both countries. And if we can do that give and take, and it benefits both, it has to be, whatever solution we find has to be a win-win solution for both. But the essence of this is, do we want to keep this East African community intact? And I think if we speak to our, if we listen to our leaders, they want to. So I think it's possible to kind of.
Let's cross over to YouTube, and Nilesh Dodia says, how will you address issues of creating more jobs in Kenya? Companies importing finished goods from overseas against the same available goods locally instead creating jobs overseas. Moshai?
Yeah, that is really the bottom line on manufacturing, is how can we manufacture? And I think it has two sides to it. One, like we talked about earlier, we were talking about ventilators and those kind of things. So there are things that we are not making here. So that's always a challenge. People need the things that they are going to buy, so they're going to get them somewhere. Our bottom line, and one of the questions we've been asking also, is how can our local manufacturers compete with manufactured goods from elsewhere? And those are the questions we're asking. It's not just at a manufacturer level internally within your own business, but also, are there restrictions or constraints from the regulatory environment, from the tax environment, that is making us less competitive in the things that we're making here? And you find that in some of those cases they already exist. There are things that we are trying to balance, and saying to government, how can we balance these things so that we are...
Things like?
I'll give you a good example. My industry in pharmaceuticals, veterinary pharmaceuticals. So we were previously zero rated for VAT. And what happens is that if you import a finished good from India or China, you will not pay VAT when you bring them here finished, already packed. But if I'm making it here, it's the same in agricultural products, I have to buy the label, I have to buy the bottle, pay for electricity, etc. All of those things have VAT on them. When the government moves it from zero rated to exempt, I cannot recover that VAT. That VAT becomes a cost. So already my inputs are getting 14% more expensive than my competitor nation. So there are some things within the tax regimes that start we're inadvertently making local production more expensive than imported goods. The second thing we encourage our members here also to do is about quality. And how can we invest in quality? How can we invest in our delivering what the customer wants? And the key benefit we know that we have, always compared to any importer, is that you're close to the consumer.
Okay.
You're closer to the consumer, you should know exactly what your consumer wants, and you can actually make much better to suit their needs so that you can give them value that they want. And there are so many industries already existing that are able to do that because they are close to the consumer and know what they want. In fact, I remember talking to a couple of like footwear companies, and they were saying, some of the footwear they make, especially say the low end or the industrial footwear, there is no competition from outside because they are closer to their customers and they know how to. They've tied up their loose ends so that they know exactly what they're going to give them.
Looks like people on YouTube are following our conversation, and I want to throw this to you, Shah. Samantha Maina asked a question with regards to consequences of manufacturers who disregard labor laws, but you had answered that. She goes on to say, membership revoked, maybe shut down the plant, more must be done. You want to take that?
Right. This. Okay, so as a members association, we cannot also be like a judge of. I think there is a place for everything to be judged. Yes, as I mentioned, I think as a membership organization, we all the time encourage our members to follow the law. In terms of what we would not like to do is go to drastic actions. We would like to try and see how we can bring our members to try and understand and actually bring some kind of compliancy, and that's the way we grow. Okay. Revoking is not an answer to.
Yeah. I think I just add there that we have no powers to close anybody. Yes. We're a voluntary organization. Yes. But I think you also need to look at it. Maybe the better analogy is like a church. So you have your church members, guys who come on Sunday. They are sinners, they are good people, and so on. But what you are doing is encouraging people do the right thing. So if you start telling them you can't come in because you know what you did last night or last week, you lose the opportunity to influence them and so on. But what is clear for us, and I think it's one of the things we say, for you to grow in the organization, in our leadership and so on, we have standards, which we're saying we've got these ethical standards we want to keep, and we are trying to raise them. So we are all constantly trying to raise the standard for everybody.
Okay, let's cross over to Facebook. Bill W. Mondi says, what is KAM doing differently to ensure they are creating a space for growth of young people in the manufacturing markets?
Youth.
Right. Yeah. Well, a couple of things we're doing. I think we talked about the SMEs. We also have a TVET program where we are trying to get technical skills as well. Because the other side, we didn't talk about manufacturing. It's quite technical. It's very much like music, I would say. If you're going to become a good musician, there is some technical skills that you must have, and you must play well. So it's the same. Sometimes we look at factory work like it is mindless or not necessarily as skilled, but people have to develop their skills and their capability to make work. Because one of the things about quality is not just that you can make something good once, but is that you can make it every time. And it's the same quality all the time. So we've been working with the technical training colleges so that the students can be placed in companies and have is it a 3-month internship,
Yes,
or 2 or 3 month internship, so that they're able to see what is actually happening in the workplace. And we've been working that with some of our partners, and it's an ongoing project that we hope we can expand further.
Okay,
that's
great.
one of the things we're doing.
I want to bring in 2 questions with regards to policy. On Twitter, somebody is asking, people doing informal business say Mitumba suffer under authority because they do not know or understand trade policies in place by the government. Another says on Twitter, women who do informal business face inadequacy of information. They do not know about trade licenses and requirements to run a business. How about a portal to inform informal traders about these requirements? Let's begin with Mitumba.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea in terms of how do we inform people, and that's one of our big roles actually, is informing people. And for our members, they actually have access. So if you join our membership, we give it to, they have access to all this information, and we have a portal where we put information and a help desk where people can ask questions and engage with that. So it is, because again, like we say, we are a members organization. That's what KAM is. And we are trying to also disseminate the information around what are the regulations, what you need to follow, and how best to deal with them.
In the spirit of giving, Shah, I know some people might not be members, but let's give them something, just a little bit. What are some of those trade policies that people should have at the back of their minds when they're running informal businesses, say even selling Mitumba clothes?
In terms of information, sorry? Right.
What are some of the basic policies that you must know when
Right.
you're getting into this business?
Yes, I think for any business, I mean, and this is, it's probably manufacturing or non-manufacturing, a business person needs to know where to start from, right? What licenses and the counties they need to pick up or get what licenses. A lot of this information, Ondiro, is already readily publicly available. It sits on our website, and our website is open to the public. But over and above that, I think it also sits on the county websites, and these days, most of these counties are technology very savvy. They have got all this information, and you can actually even apply most of this online. So there's no lack of information or easy access of information, like in the past when you had to actually physically go and visit a municipal office to be able to achieve and get that. But I think more probably your question, and probably more driven to, I would say, SMEs and manufacturing, a startup. This is where we want to incubate a youth who wants to start manufacturing. And this is where we are driving our conversation, that this person has just come out of university, wants to start manufacturing, doesn't know where to start from. And this is what we are striving through our SME hub, that this person can come here and he will be shown and held hands, and we probably even mentor that person to kind of see how they can actually start up a business and grow a business. As I said, we have to focus on manufacturing. As much as yes, we give and we do also interact with other business BMOs like the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, where most of the traders would be members of, and we're continuously engaging with them.
Okay. YouTube Nutrition with Lucy says, what opportunities are there for nutritionists in the manufacturing sector? And I just don't want you to talk to Lucy. I want you to talk to every other Lucy out there that might be watching and thinking, how can I align my skills and my expertise to the opportunities in the manufacturing sector?
If I may, can I actually answer, because it's something very close to my heart, because I'm in the food manufacturing space. I have a research and development department within my organization, and this is wonderful. Lucy, it's people like Lucy that we are looking for. We are looking for researchers. We are looking for people that can change the trend of how we also consume our foods. Even it might sound as basic as a maize flour, which is what we produce as well. We do many other staples, but we are constantly looking at how we can transform those produce, how we can actually add more nutrition to the diet of the consumer and give value to them. So the professions like what Lucy is in nutrition, I think is something that manufacturers will very readily embrace. We need to take them on. We need to take them into our research and development. We need to take them to try and actually also pass our message to our consumers that this and this and these are the benefits of what we are doing, but it would be very welcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mushai, you mentioned something, and it's being picked up here on Twitter with regards to taxes. And B. Bichera says, would you like to address the impact of excise duty on bottled water that is affecting manufacturers on the EGMS system? Fake and under-declared stamps will close genuine business. He goes further to say, we don't have access to proper drinking water. Rather, we don't have access to proper drinking water, and thus water is not a luxury item, and thus excise duty should be removed from bottled water.
Yeah, I think excise duty has been a growing challenge for manufacturers, and it's a good point he's raised. I think we raised that issue actually with government. Why do we want to tax drinking water? Because it is something useful and essential for life, so to speak. The whole idea on excise duties, I think it's a big area, and it's one of the things we're talking about. What's the global policy? How are we driving our tax policy overall? So excise duties are relatively new. They've always been there, considered as sin taxes. So they were mostly on alcohol, on cigarettes. We had them on large motor vehicles, etc. But we are worried that the scope is expanding. It keeps capturing new products, and so on. And the whole issue around stamps and the EGMS system has been quite problematic in terms of implementing the systems, putting in the equipment, and so on. So that has been difficult. And we've been saying to government that when you're making changes like this, there needs to be a lot of consultation. There needs to be some maybe trial runs where we've actually checked, does the system work? How well is it working? And generally thinking about, okay, what is the level of taxation we want to put on this? At the end of the day, what happens is that these taxes end up being paid by consumers.
Yes.
And so we start saying everything starts becoming more and more expensive. And then that, it reduces the productivity of our economy overall, because we are taxed too heavily on basics. And then that, it doesn't help us in our economic growth.
And just to add to EGMS, I mean, what was the objective behind EGMS? It was actually to see that illicit product would not find its way. The question is, has that met its objective as well?
Yeah.
If it has not met its objective, we ended up kind of creating a cost to that product without meeting the objective. So these are some of the very pertinent questions which we are engaging.
I want to stay with you, Shah, because you spoke about the Kenya-Tanzania diplomatic tiff. On Twitter, somebody is saying, do you fear this aviation tiff will escalate to other sectors other than aviation? If so, what specific fears are your members grappling with? Are you in discussion with governments over the same? And if so, what is your position?
Yes, answer to the question is there's ongoing discussions which are going. We probably don't participate on the aviation side, but more on the trade side. But we know for sure that the teams in government are actively engaging behind the scenes, and there are some discussions which are going towards. Some take a bit longer, but eventually I think, because the tricky part of this is that because there's this whole issue of pandemic, and that's why, because one aspect has not been sorted out, it's leaving another one hanging. Yeah. But eventually I think, I believe that from the discussions that we have heard from the government side as well, and we have also been participating in some of those joint government, private sector government meetings, there is a lot of engagement going behind the scenes.
And I think it's fair to say that it's, like you mentioned, it's not uncommon between neighbors that there are issues that come up at different times. Actually, I was very surprised to hear recently that even between Sweden and Denmark, there's actually a bridge, there's a train. There are people who live in Sweden and work in Denmark, and they go every day. And recently they actually stopped that train, and they took they had a little bit of a disagreement, and like you said, it's around COVID management and so on.
Yeah.
So these things will pass whenever you're with your neighbors, but the commitment to continue with the conversations, I think, is important. We're talking about EAC, but we're also talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and so on. So we're going to be interacting more and more. And the future is together, because your neighbors are there and we will be together. So we will continue interacting and have those conversations that will take us forward. Yeah.
Probably this is a question I don't have much say in, but she was your colleague, so you might. Betty Maina was at the helm of KAM. Kenyans want to believe she'll do more in promoting SMS. You worked with Betty?
Yes, yes, we did. Yeah. Betty was the CEO for KAM for a long time.
That's the part you say nice things.
Yes. Yes. And to be fair, I think it is one of the conversations. We have a meeting with her next week.
Yes.
And SMEs is always on the agenda about what are we doing for SMEs, how are we going to grow them. The fund we talked about, these are conversations that have been going on. So I don't think it's it's an issue. Now, how we will succeed going through that it is challenging, and I think SMEs are a challenge, like we said, everywhere in the world. But it's about that training, how we can grow them in their skills as well, not just funding. So it's a bigger conversation, and it is ongoing. So that's a good thing. Yeah.
Speaking of Betty, recently America and Kenya have begun conversations about a trade-free area and just increasing the market share of Kenyan goods in the United States of America. How will this go to benefit SMEs?
If there's one area I can look at, is the agricultural sector. I believe that the agricultural sector is going to benefit, and hopefully as a result of that, we hope also agro-processing together with that will actually benefit, because I think there are products that we make here, of course, that we have a comparative advantage over, whether it's tea, whether it's flowers in the horticultural sector. So this is a sector that I believe that we have a very strong.
Nuts,
and then of course the other one is the textile and apparel. The one that right now we are exporting under AGOA. And this is actually something maybe just mentioning to creation of jobs. We are part of a think tank here, and we are looking at these two value chains. One is the textile and the apparel sector, and the other one is the tea sector. How we can create so many more jobs, export jobs, jobs that actually are also going to bring foreign currency to the country.
Okay. We're almost coming to the tail end of the conversation. Your tweets are coming in fast and furious. We'll try to go through them as fast as we can. Evian K says, is it possible to have an integrated steel mill in the country? And what are the effects of that on competition legislation? Mushai, why are you smiling?
It's a hard question to start with on the steel mills. But I think the challenge with steel, again, is for us is we don't have iron ore or coal. So you find that some of those heavy industries, you need to have one of the two. There is some, I think we've got some coal deposits in Kitui, which were being looked at and so on, and I don't really know about, and the coastal region, and I'm not really sure about them. But generally, for the real steel mills, those are the two kind of raw materials that you need close by to be able to get to a big integrated mill. And then again, it's about the volume of it. That's the much I know about the details on the steel industry, but I think it remains a big challenge.
Okay, quick one here. Why do most Kenyans have more trust in imported goods than locally manufactured goods?
That's interesting. Okay, I think this is a question where we're saying that we have been importing and of late in the last maybe 2 or 3 decades we have been importing a lot from China. Partly because maybe those goods were not locally available, and this is where the narrative is changing, and this is where we are actually, as even KAM saying, we need to now, as consumers in Kenya, try and support the local manufacturers. Buy Kenya, build Kenya. It's like
the challenge with that will always be cost. How do we address the cost factor to increase competitiveness?
So it's the cart before the horse or the horse before the cart. Unless we start manufacturing, unless we start creating that industry and grow it, we will never bring down our cost. Unless we start talking about the kind of conversations we're having with government. How do we make ourselves more competitive? How can we remove some of the impediments, like the low-hanging fruits, whether it's stable tax policies, whether it's unnecessary levies and taxes, whether it's actually unnecessary regulations which could be impacting businesses. Those are the things that's what we are discussing. If we become competitive, I believe a Kenyan manufacturer can not only compete here, but can compete globally. And that's what we want to achieve. We want to not be only competitive in Kenya, but within the region and beyond as well.
Beyond and export. And I think I would also, I'm not exactly sure that is true in all instances, because we buy, let's say, I think, I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I think like House of Manji in Britannia are probably the leading biscuits.
Oh yeah. Last I heard of Britannia, it was such a baby, but yeah.
I mean, if you go to any supermarket, and look at the stocks there. It's mostly locally manufactured goods that are leading. So I don't know that imported goods are necessarily the top leaders in some areas. Obviously, there are some things. We're here seated facing cameras. There are no cameras made in Kenya, so there would be imported things. So there are different things which are imported as compared to what is locally available.
Okay.
One of the good ones, actually, I can, even if we say we're talking about textiles and so on, we've seen, and we had last year, for instance, we had a Changamuka festival where we were showcasing what is available here. And you could see what local people are making, whether it's shirts, even shirts like this, it could be a white shirt, but it's done locally, it's local cotton and everything. So it is still, you can't say that it is universal. And if we are in a liberalized economy and trading globally, there will be some things which will come, that would be imported.
Yes.
But there is a lot that is made here, and we need to see those things and start looking for them, like you're saying, buy Kenya, build Kenya. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a comment here. To strengthen supply chains for continued trade across East Africa, we need to rethink our policies that favor SMEs, promote value addition and distribution systems, and make use of IT technology. Muchai, I think you commented on this.
Yeah.
Maybe just one last one. Innovative youth wanainuliwaje, wako na ideas lakini hawajui waanzie wapi.
Yeah, that's always a challenge, innovation, which we need.
No, but I believe there are certain initiatives which are going on. I mean, in the innovation, I mean, whether it's IT related, you have now the IT hub, which has been created. So we are, and I think it's not only us as Kenyans. In fact, the Silicon Valley is realizing that there's so much IT talent here. So there are so many other incubation hubs which are, I mean, the other day I saw Stanford University kind of now having something where they want to inculcate the IT culture which is here. I mean, look at like so Twiga Foods, and what's that? That's all homegrown. That's all grown from here, IT.
Yeah.
So it's very possible, and I think it's happening.
Yeah.
Maybe some might not be as visible, but I think, and this is the youth that we are just talking about, who are the ones who will bring this.
Okay, we've spoken about the youth. It will only be fair. We also spoke about women. What are some of the opportunities for women in manufacturing?
Very many opportunities, and it's good you mentioned women in manufacturing. We actually have a forum in KEM which we call Women in Manufacturing, where we are bringing the women who are both working in manufacturing and who are leading manufacturing firms and manufacturing investments together so that they can share ideas and exchange views on what they're going to do. We are lucky, our first woman chair was also a woman in manufacturing. That's Flora Mutai, who was in manufacturing tea and tea products. So they're there, the opportunities are there. I think the sky is the limit for them. And what we need is maybe more networks. They'll still get the financing, the skilling again, and just stepping out there and doing the stuff and being ready to take it on. Yeah.
Sure.
Equally, I mean, just like SME, women in manufacturing, we actually have made it as our motto to carve out a very special niche here for. I mean, women do not. I mean, just like they have the skills. It's not that they don't have the skills. I think we just need to create those opportunities for them and showcase the successes which have happened within the. And if we showcase those successes and they become mentors for other women, that will also be a good way to promote women.
Okay. Great. Finally, as we wind up this conversation, we have had a very intricate conversation on the state of the manufacturing sector, the COVID-19 disruption, opportunities, and some of the challenges. But what is the future of this sector with regards to the fact that WHO says maybe for the next 2 years we might still be battling COVID-19? So short term and long term.
Yeah. So we're going to have to take measures that take care of both. And I like the way you put it in short term and long term. So short term, like we talked about earlier, is how do we ensure that you get through these maybe bumpier times, the rougher times? How do you adjust your supply chains? How do you manage your cash flow to make sure that it will carry through the difficult times? But looking forward, I think we are also looking at there is talk of what are the opportunities in realigning global supply chains, because people are now beginning to think maybe we need to produce in more areas and not just focus production in, say, the Far East or the Indian subcontinent. So we have opportunities to base manufacturing for Africa here locally. We have still the opportunity, like we're talking about the pre-existing conditions that we still need to deal with. So our competitiveness, both at firm level and national level. How are we going to make sure that we are attracting investment and that we are managing whatever we are doing here, adding quality and value so that we can create more opportunity. One of the things we did mention is that manufacturing also grows when you have big exports. So a big focus on exports is critical. And the challenge with exports is having quality that compete globally. Because once you start talking about selling to other countries, that country has an option to go anywhere in the world. So you've got to think about world-class standards that can allow people to take from you whatever we're doing. And that's what we really need to develop as
and just to add to what Michelle said is that with this pandemic, we have seen how US, the Western world, is also shifting their supply chains. And we've seen also the trade wars which are going on. So Africa will actually be a beneficiary. We need to be ready, we need to step up and actually be willing to now supply, be ready to supply competitively to this new, to these markets, which already are there, but they are much larger than what we are actually.
If you could briefly, the PowerPoint, touch on the future of manufacturing with regards to Industry 4.0 sustainability.
Right. So Industry 4.0, it's sustainability is about how we can actually kind of ensure that we sustain from the point of, from an environmental point of view, from a competitive point of view. So there are different angles to how the sustainability. Let me take the environmental angle. Manufacturers here already, we have seen the conversation in the last 2-3 years about sustainable, so the circular economy, the green economy, and how we want to kind of make it more sustainable. How we also be cognizant of our environment. So how the use of plastics and the reduction of that, and how can we make that. So that's what we are talking about, the sustainability. Industries will have to take cognizant of the fact that are we actually manufacturing environmentally friendly. Today, I mean, interestingly, I read the report, and this is more of a global thing, that they are talking about in the fashion industry about the carbon footprint, right? And they're talking about how we maybe the industry is not yet quite there. So this will be a conversation which is going to also come here, probably also benefit us as a country. That as we might be seeing that because of that excess or manufacturing of garments to feed the Western world, and of course some of that then find its way into our in the likes of Mitumba. Now the conversation will be how will they become more efficient. If those things are going to kind of have a reduction in those manufacturing, then we will have to start gearing ourselves to ensure that we are able to clothe our population, right? So I think these are all some of the sustainable conversations which are going on, and many will benefit industry.
I think the 4.2, again, the opportunity we have is to leapfrog. If we take something like M-Pesa, which we did in Africa, we leapfrogged so many technologies. If you take other countries, they moved from cash to checks to credit cards. Now they're doing mobile money. As we kind of went cash to mobile money straight away. So Industry 4.0 is also a huge opportunity for us because we can start doing things using the new technology that is available. And now the good thing again from the internet is that the information is available. If there is a latest machine made in Taiwan or Germany, you can find it on the internet and you'll be able to use it and see what it can do and whether it can fit into the market. And you can import it. So 4.2, like they call it additive manufacturing, 3D printing. Huge opportunities there that we could use, because actually there was a professor who told us once, we will become manufacturers when you start making tools. So it's not just being able to make say flour or to make pharmaceuticals. When you can make the machine that makes the pharmaceuticals, then you are now a manufacturing powerhouse. But sustainability, I think, is a whole new webinar or a whole thing we can talk about, but there's a huge opportunity. The one thing I like to stress about sustainability and the circular economy is that you're using existing resources. The idea is, how do we keep the existing resources in the supply chain, in the value chain, so you stop throwing away things. And that is a huge opportunity because we have those resources already. It's just, how do we translate them into value?
Now we want to wind up this conversation, but for those who might not have caught it, I want to give each of you 30 seconds parting shots. Let's start with you, Shah.
Thank you. I am very positive. Of course, we are going through a whole unique situation right now, which is probably once in a generational event. But once we pass this, I'm very positive that we are going to come out of this well. We're going to come out of this stronger, and we are going to actually grow our economy.
Yeah.
Mushay?
Yep, I think I agree with Rajan, and just to say that the opportunity is for us to do things differently. It's for us to start thinking about productivity. We need to change. It's true that there is an opportunity, but the opportunity calls on us to change, to start looking at how can we increase that productivity, increase our competitiveness, and start aligning ourselves to the new world that is coming, because there is a lot of opportunity. And we can do it if we focus on it. We've proved that we can actually do it.
Great. Thank you so much for making time. And also you who have been joining us via YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, thank you for making time. This conversation ends here, but it does not stop here. It continues online. The hashtag to use is KAM Leadership. It has been such an amazing 1 hour, 30 minutes having a conversation with regards to the disruption of COVID-19 in the manufacturing sector. What are some of the challenges? Where do the opportunities lie? And what does the future look like? Well, they say, never let a good pandemic go to waste. Look for the opportunities and leverage those opportunities. Always remember, adapt, survive, and disrupt. My name is Ndiro Ganga. It has been an absolute pleasure. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you. Great.